So if you're wondering whether you can have a vaginal orgasm during sex, during intercourse specifically, it depends what kind. There are actually 4 very distinct types of vaginal orgasms during intercourse that women can have. They're all very different experiences, and I'm going to explain all of them to you today and how they happen. I'm Alexey Welsh, and I've been teaching holistic sex for the last 20 years. Now, this is going to be a no bullshit video in the sense that it's not going to be like 117 different orgasms, because we can touch an ear and we can call it an orgasm. And because somebody somewhere had some kind of an unusual sensitive spot in the vagina, and now we call it an X spot orgasm or whatever. A different spot doesn't make a different kind of vaginal orgasm. There are actually 4 very different kinds of experiences, types of experiences of vaginal orgasm. They have a very different nature. They feel very different. These vaginal orgasms all have different kind of energy for you, and they happen in a very different way. And over the course of working with women for 20 years, I've seen that these 4 types of vaginal orgasms during intercourse are fairly common for women, and most women will have either one or a few of them. So the first kind of vaginal orgasm during intercourse is the peak orgasm. So the classic picture of an orgasm that you are used to by stimulating the clitoris or through oral sex, through fingers, you reach a peak, a crescendo. There's one intense explosion and then a release. So a lot of women and their partners would expect to have that kind of peak orgasm in the vagina as a vaginal orgasm during sex. And actually, it's actually quite rare to have that kind of orgasm, because things are not very well positioned to be able to reach a climax in the intercourse that way, because the only way you could have a peak orgasm is by stimulating the clitoris. So either you're stimulating the clitoral head itself, or you're stimulating the kind of the submerged parts of the clitoris, the legs around the vaginal opening, or you're stimulating the G-spot. It's all part of the same kind of clitoral complex. They all would have a peak orgasm if stimulated correctly. But during the intercourse, it's very difficult to stimulate that complex, because either you are grinding on the outside of the clitoris. Some women might come this way, but it's actually the minority, because the clitoris has to be particularly sensitive, particularly responsive for it. Or a very small number of women might be able to trigger that kind of orgasm because the clitoral tissues are around the opening and they might trigger an orgasm. Or, the G-spot is so sensitive that it might have this kind of release, but this is a very, very small number of women. So actually, this is the kind of vaginal orgasm during sex that everybody expects, but it is probably the most uncommon and the most rare to have. The second type of vaginal orgasm you can have is what we call a cervical orgasm. So it's basically at the back part of the vagina, at the back wall of it. That area is also sensitive, potentially, and it's a very different kind of network. It has a different feeling. So when it is stimulated, massaged during the intercourse, it might have a certain experience that we could call a vaginal orgasm during sex, that is called a cervical orgasm. Now, personally, I see it less of an orgasm and more just that ongoing flow of strong sexual energy waves into you, because it doesn't really have a nature of peak and release. It's not that kind of experience. It's an ongoing, flowing, orgasmic experience. You can call it flowing orgasmic waves. And it basically happens for as long as you're stimulating the cervix. Now, you have to be very careful with the technique for that kind of orgasm, because a lot of women actually feel discomfort there. It might be painful. You have to be very, very gentle. There's a lot of emotional work normally involved in opening that kind of orgasmic experience in the cervical area. I have a video on cervical orgasms specifically if you're interested, but it is potentially a really powerful, a really nourishing kind of orgasmic experience in the vagina. These waves can be really rich and ongoing, and they can feel really nutritious for a woman, and they can be really, really deep, and they go on, and they kind of escalate and snowball during sex. Now, if you're enjoying this so far, please give this video a like and subscribe. I would really appreciate that. I also have a free course for you called Transform Your Sex Now. It gives you some key lessons to change your sex life right now, today, and immediately bring more richness, nourishing energy, love, and connection into your sex right now. The link is below the video in the description. Go and download it. It is completely free for you. The third kind of vaginal orgasm that I've seen women have is what I personally would call kind of a subtle orgasmic experience, when the vagina goes in the opposite direction from that intensity and you start slowing down and becoming more quiet and more present inside the vagina. It becomes a really sensitive space. And if you reach into it and you really let go and you really relax, sometimes you might have these kind of rushes, these ongoing rushes of energy going through you, seemingly from very little movement. So these are very interesting experiences. They're very difficult to describe. They're just these kind of expansions, these openings in your whole being. They're very deep. And then the last kind of vaginal orgasm during intercourse is what we would call an orgasmic state inside the vagina. So the vagina is not an organ that you want to treat like a panel with buttons that you press and you cause an orgasm. It can work a little bit like this in the case of the cervical orgasm, because you have a specific area, and actually if you're stimulating it, you can intentionally cause those orgasmic waves. But the orgasmic state is something very different. It's when you experience your vagina as a really kind of whole live space. You just feel everything in it. And it becomes really alive, it becomes really sensitive, it becomes really vibrant, and it just becomes a really live space that emits those sexual energy waves and sensations and vibrations into you. It can have many different forms, this kind of vaginal orgasm during sex. Sometimes it is more gentle, sometimes it is kind of more subtle, sometimes it is really quite powerful, sometimes it goes between different intensities. It can feel like it's coming from different places, it can feel like it's coming from the whole space of the vagina. So the whole vagina becomes really quite sensitive, basically. This is a really beautiful experience that has many different colors and can go on for, through different phases in the same sex act. How do you have this? There's no kind of way of having that vaginal orgasm. It is a result of really good lovemaking. It is a result of connecting really well with the vagina. It normally involves a really good physical technique, quite advanced physical technique of how you're moving creatively with variation. It normally involves the mental technique, the emotional technique of connecting through the vagina and from your lover. It is basically a result of really good lovemaking. When you feel really, really good in the vagina, you really tune in, you become really sensitive, and that is when that kind of blissful state happens. By the way, if you're interested in learning more, I teach you the complete practice of holistic sex in my online courses, which you can see on my website. So the takeaway from all of this is that the vagina can have vaginal orgasms during the intercourse, during sex, but the kind of thing that people normally expect, which is that peak explosion and release, is actually quite uncommon as a vaginal orgasm. And that is normally achieved by stimulation with the fingers or through oral sex. The vaginal orgasms during sex that are far more common are of a different nature. They're of a nature of a flow in orgasmic waves or an orgasmic vibrational state. And that kind of orgasm is typically not something you can work on as an orgasm. The best orgasms inside the vagina during sex just come as spontaneous experiences from really enjoying sex and tuning in really well, feeling that every moment of sex is really nourishing you, relaxing into it, not chasing any orgasms, and that's when they might happen. So this is a really interesting reflection. Now, I would really recommend you to download my free practical training that will teach you to really become more present, to feel more sexual energy in each moment, to connect with each moment better, and that might very well help you to feel more in the vagina. So that training is completely free. You can download it by following the link below the video in the description.